GrimmHuman Hybridization, the idea that a Grimm and a human could combine in some way, shape, or form to create a being that is both human and Grimm. Likely, if this were to occur naturally, the Grimm would be the dominant factor and the human mind would be lost. Thus, you'd be left with a being that is both human and Grimm, but acts very much like a Grimm, operating of instinct, attracted to negative emotion, but having access to a Grimm's ferocity, its attack power, probably mutated, having the bone plating and defenses that a Grimm would have, as well as having the human aspect of having access to a human's reflexes and their battle experience that they've gained throughout their life. Having that added aspect would make a terrifying opponent, much more dangerous than a Grimm would be, being able to block attacks, fight with weapons, etc. Not to mention, if the human soul stayed intact, even if the mind was lost, this opens up the possibility that a Grimm could use aura, or operating off of reflexes and instincts could have access to semblance that remained within the soul, so that would make an even more terrifying an opponent for someone to face. Now, GrimmHuman Hybridization isn't a new idea in the RWBY fandom. This has been around for quite a while, a number of years actually, but this has resurfaced because of what we saw in Volume 7's finale. We got another look at Cinder Fall's arm, which is the only GrimmHuman hybrid that we have seen in the RWBY series. Now, I said if this occurred naturally, it would probably see the Grimm as the dominant force, but since there was the outside influence of Salem, Cinder still has control over this shadow hand that she has. We first saw it in Volume 5, and Cinder used it to try to steal the maiden powers. It seems to have some affinity for magic, being able to suck the powers out of Raven, etc. And when we were first introduced to Cinder's Grimm arm, there was a clear distinction between the shadow hand itself and the remainder of Cinder's human arm. But when we get to Volume 7, and we see the shadow hand again, that clear distinction is pretty much completely gone. It looks like the Grimm is starting to creep up her arm onto her body itself, and this was probably done intentionally, not just some stylistic choice of the animators. So this begs the question, is Cinder's arm slowly corrupting or taking over her body? And the answer to that is likely yes, because Grimm and human biology were never supposed to mix, especially on a cellular level such as Cinder and her arm, because there is a pretty intricate biological connection between the two. We've seen other prosthetics in the RWBY series, Yang's arm, Tyrion's tail, and similarly, with Cinder's arm, she has full control over motion, able to move all the fingers, extend it outwards, etc. But her arm is very different than other prosthetics for the fact that Cinder has all of her senses within that arm. Her sense of pain, her sense of touch, hot and cold, etc. In her fight with Raven, when a fragment of blade stabbed into it, Cinder felt that pain. When Freya froze the entire room, Cinder felt that through her arm. And especially felt a massive amount of pain when Winter cut the arm off completely. Now, the arm can also regenerate, but as of right now, we're kind of unsure whether that's an inherent ability of the arm, whether Cinder has control over it, whether it's utilizing some of Cinder's magic to do this, etc. Still a few unknowns with that, but since it's connected to Cinder cellularly, on a biological level, connected to all of her nerves, able to receive signals from her brain to, move, etc., but also send signals back, senses of pain, etc., this thing is very intricately connected to Cinder's body. And so, when given the opportunity, it can start corrupting the human tissue it's in contact with. And I say when given the opportunity because I think there's reasons why the Grimm corruption hasn't, progressed further onto Cinder's body, or that it did take so long to do this. And there was a clear distinction between the arm and her human arm when we first saw it, that the corruption hadn't started yet. And this all has to do with aura. In fact, I think it was said best by Raven when Cinder and Raven had their fight. Raven said that aura can't protect your arm. It's Grimm, which is something that we've known since Volume 1. Grimm do not have aura. They do not have a soul like other living creatures. And so it makes sense that aura was not able to protect Cinder's arm, even though Cinder had it active and was able to protect the rest of her body. But that's exactly it. Aura was protecting the rest of Cinder's body. Every single human cell in her body was protected not only from attacks from opponents, etc., but from the Grimm arm and the corruption that it would provide to the human tissue itself. So her aura was operating in that factor as well. So when Raven broke her aura at the end of that fight, that gave the perfect opportunity for the Grimm arm to start corrupting Cinder's body. And I think that's exactly what it did. First starting with the tissue itself, infecting like the bone or whatever organs are inside a human's body. In the world of Remnant, I'm not exactly sure what the biological aspect of aura is. It's generated by the soul, but I'm guessing there's something in biology that's involved in it as well. So the Grimm would start infecting the cells, making it so that they could not produce aura, and so aura would no longer protect that portion of Cinder's body. So that by the time Cinder was able to regenerate her aura or get it active again, that part of her tissue was already lost, and the Grimm was able then to corrupt the outside of it, etc. Because if we look at just the look of the skin underneath this Grimm corruption in Volume 7, it looks a lot more deformed, like burned and everything like that, differing than from what we saw in Volume 5 or 6 when we saw the Shadow Hand. Because even though it was covered still by a part of Cinder's clothing, we can see parts of her skin where it seems just her regular skin color. And then, of course, burned where her arm was blown off, and then a clear distinction where the Grimm hand would start. Very different than what it looks now, and I think that's because of the Grimm corrupting the cells and able to take it over. Now, the reason that Grimm is able to do this is because they are inherently creatures of destruction. They were created to be humanity's downfall. And even on a biological level, I think that's true. So if Grimm are biologically connected to a human, they will start corrupting that tissue, etc. Now, Salem has control over any Grimm that she wants to, it seems. And because of that, I think Salem could definitely stop this corruption if she so desired. But I don't think she does desire to do this because it's a good incentive for Cinder, not to lose anymore. Because Cinder has been on a pretty massive losing streak ever since the fall of Beacon Academy. She was, defeated at the end of it, but considering she crippled an entire kingdom, I think it's a pretty resounding victory for Cinder. Since then, though, Battle of Haven Academy was an utter failure because of Cinder, so that's already not something Salem's too fond of, but even in Volume 7, Cinder still lost, still took off, wasn't able to achieve her own goals. Neo was the one who was victorious and got the relic. Cinder's going to try to take credit for that, but still, I don't even know. I'm guessing Cinder probably is aware of the Grimm corruption. I don't know how she couldn't be. It's happening to her own body, but still, eventually, if Cinder has her aura broken enough times, I think this will eventually start being able to infect cells. And once it gets to the actual core of her body and start, affecting her inner organs, her heart, or just creeping upwards into her brain, that's gonna eventually completely take over Cinder. Now, as I mentioned, if her soul is still active, then this Grimm, this hybrid, this being or monster that is formed, which would just be operating off of instinct, would no longer be Cinder or have the same hatred for certain characters. They might still have the instinctual hatred for RWBY, not exactly sure, but this being would be terrifying to deal with if it still had access to semblance, to aura. Regardless, though, I think Cinder, once she is fully corrupted, will still have access to the maiden powers, because this Grimm arm itself has an inherent affinity for magic. The fact that it's able to suck out the power from other maidens, when it tried to do that with Raven, is enough proof in and of itself that if it did completely take over Cinder, it would still have the magic and would just be a terrifying force. A Grimm maiden would then be born. So yeah, that's my overall idea with Cinder, at least. She is the first GrimmHuman hybrid that we've seen, and just by what we saw in Volume 7, it looks like that corruption is going to continue until Cinder's eventual fate, after her aura is broken enough times, or maybe Salem just desires for the Grimm arm to take control over her. If Salem's displeased with her or something like that, then Cinder will become a corrupted Grimm, or a GrimmHuman hybrid that is more terrifying than any other Grimm in the series. But beyond that, I don't think Cinder is going to be the only GrimmHuman hybrid that we see. We've seen other Grimm that have parasitic aspects to it. A Geist Grimm, for example, is able to take control of, non-biological objects, able to infect ice or dust or, a tree stump or rocks, etc. But if a human's aura was broken and they didn't have their aura active, maybe a Geist Grimm could infect that person. We also saw in the RWBY manga, although it's canon, it's not canon, or it's not canon, however it was described, there was a little octopus Grimm that was a parasitic Grimm in and of itself that was able to combine four King Taijitus in and of it, like together to form a Yamata no Yorochi, or an 8-headed snake Grimm that was absolutely terrifying that Team RWBY and Juniper had to fight. As well as, I believe, no one wanted to get anywhere near the thing because it was extremely dangerous and could potentially take over a human. I think that's what was implied by this manga chapter. Whether the writers of RWBY, whether Miles and Carey had some input on that, not exactly sure, but since those ideas are out there, I think there are Grimm, or especially Grimm that Salem could create, that could take over a person's body. And there's one person in particular that I think there's a likelihood of it happening to, and that would be Adam. Because Adam, of course, being stabbed 2 times through the chest, as well as falling off of a cliff, smacking into a rock, and then into the water, he would be bleeding out, have his spine broken, and probably also drown. So yeah, I hear you guys. I can already hear your comments down below saying, well, Adam's most assuredly dead, and yes, you would be right, except if somehow a Grimm assimilated with his body and saved his life. Adam, in and of himself, as we know him, would be dead, but his body could be put to use if they somehow preserved it living, or was able to corrupt it with a Grimm in some way, shape, or form. And I think this could be the case because of where Adam fell into the water. It is very cold where it was. There was snow on the ground, so if Adam fell into that water and he didn't, bleed out within a few seconds, assuming that the blades that stabbed him in the chest missed his heart and missed, the giant blood-carrying veins and arteries in his body, maybe it would take a couple minutes for him to bleed out, and in that water he would go into a hypothermic state, so he might be able to be preserved for a few more minutes at least, maybe 10, 15, I'm not exactly sure, but Salem is well aware of Adam's usefulness. She knows from talking with Hazel that he is a strong fighter, and if she had the opportunity to, take him over with a Grimm and just use him as a pawn, I'm sure she definitely would. How exactly that would happen, I'm not exactly sure, because frankly, he wouldn't be surviving long with the wounds that he had, so it would have to be real convenient, or possibly Salem has a Grimm monitoring the situation, or something like that, where if they happen upon his almost dead body, then, might be able to take over it and corrupt his body, etc., turning him into a Grimm. And I think if Adam was to be turned into a Grimm, that would be rather poetic. In The White Fang, the first to don the mask of a Grimm was Adam himself. He started that entire trend. Humanity saw them as monsters, so Adam decided to don the face of a monster. And if he was literally turned into a Grimm, that would be kind of a poetic end to his narrative. Not to mention, if he was sent after Team RWBY, and if he was corrupted as a Grimm, possibly most of his body, or likely most of his body, would be covered in the black of a Grimm and the white bone parts of a Grimm as well, plus having the red aesthetic that Adam is also known for. Etchings throughout the white parts of the Grimm would be pretty badass to see, but also peeking through the Grimm would be some of his human portions, being most likely his eye and the SDC brand that is on it, which would be a great way to tie that back into the story, because we haven't touched on that yet. I fully believe that that's going to happen in Volume 8 with Jacques Schnee now in prison after they deal with the whale and everything that's going to happen to Atlas in Volume 8. I think they'll have their moment to interrogate Jacques and find out what exactly happened with that. Maybe get some of the past that happened with Adam, how he came to hate humanity so much, how he gained so much spite towards humanity, plus having Adam return to the story would make Blake and Yang relive the drama that they went through fighting him and eventually, in their minds, killing him if he wasn't actually dead. In this case, he would be kind of dead, but kind of not, being combined with the Grimm. You get the overall idea, but this would be especially traumatic for Blake after having gone through the emotional roller coaster that was her relationship with Adam. So this would be an interesting way to tie that in, and there might also be other characters that would eventually get turned into a human Grimm hybrid, though I don't think it's going to be something that's, mass-produced, but possibly Salem has been working with this already, and and there could be other characters or other human Grimm hybrids that Salem has to use as weapons at some point in the future. I don't think she'll bring them with her to Atlas, but if they exist, they'd be used in later volumes, perhaps in the final battle, etc. Like if Salem ever had a pawn that, you know, was strong but was disobedient, like Cinder is kind of being now, or was throughout Volume 5. She's gotten a little better. Or perhaps in the past, she's also maybe captured other huntsmen or huntresses or other silver-eyed warriors like Summer Rose and possibly corrupted them with Grimm as well. It could be something that Salem is working on, and there are quite a few possibilities with this just by having Cinder being able to have this shadow hand that she is controlling right now, and it looks like it's corrupting her body. So there's a lot of potential for this, and I would love to know your guys' thoughts. Do you think that Cinder will eventually turn into a fully Grimmified, I guess if that's the correct word, there's not really a good word for this. Let me know if you have any suggestions for that, but do you think that's going to be Cinder's overall fate? Do you think that could be a potential way for Adam, at least something that looks like Adam, but not being Adam himself, to return to the story and, you know, bring those plot points back with him, or other characters that might be corrupted in a similar fashion? What do you guys think? Let me know down in the comments below. I really look forward to hearing your thoughts on this topic. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more RWBY videos, theories, the matches that are going on for the Phoenix Festival Tournament. Join the Guild of the Eternal Flame. Tweet me at PhoenixKnight7, and I'll see you guys in the next video.